Welcome to the Purple Political Breakdown. And a lot of the things that I hear from certain climate change scientists are just not reasonable and practical based on current society. When the people say, hey man, use your phone less, use your car less, stuff like that, people are not going to listen to you. People are not going to do this. In this situation, you just got to use paint. Like if there's no extra step, you're just using something that you would use anyway to paint whatever you're about to paint. But a more one that actually has other benefits and positives versus another version of paint at the end of the day. And these are the type of solutions that I think are better suited for this modern day. But instead of going backwards, because we know we won't, technology will continue to progress and technology will continue to advance. So we're never going to go back in the old age when we're turning off our AC, heater, never using a car, and never using our phone. Do you want a great website like this? This is my podcast website where I direct the audience to come to, watch the content, listen to the content, read the blogs, and much, much more. If you want to have your own customizable podcast website, then join my affiliate link in my description to sign up for something called Podpage, and they can help you customize an easy podcast website for your personal podcast. Sign up to get a discount now. Again, use the link in my description to join Podpage now. Are you enjoying today's podcast episode? I really hope you do. And I really hope you enjoy the fact that I have an amazing guest talking with me and having this great discussion. If you, as an individual, personally have your own podcast and maybe you want to have great guests on your podcast as well, I got a deal for you. In my description, there is a link to something called Podmatch. Make sure to join that link through my affiliate link so you can sign up to get matched up with other podcast hosts and podcast guests so you make sure you are never missing an episode without a productive guest to have an amazing conversation with. Podmatch is similar to any other kind of matching site for the most part, and it's super easy to use. Just $6 a month and you can have a guest for each and every podcast episode that is tailored to your specific topic. So again, join the link in my description and join Podmatch now. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are at it again. I'm your host, Riddell Lewis. Now, my co-hosts are not here today, so we're going to go solo with the guest of today's topic, as we're going to be talking about climate change, a very hot button issue in today's society. People think it doesn't exist. People think it exists and it's going to destroy the world. We're going to go into all that, all the nuanced conversations behind that. And in order to have that conversation, we have some great guests today. To start off, we have Beth. And we're going to talk about the technology they have in regards to climate change. We're going to talk about the nuances behind the issue as well, of course. So before we do any of that, we're going to go over what you need to know, kind of catch people up in current events so everybody's on the same page, and a few things that you may need to know if you don't know already. India apparently just recently landed on the moon, on the south part of the moon, a huge step forward in their NASA program. Russia allegedly shot down the leader of the Wagner group, and apparently when he was on his private jet. And recently, now that the presidential election season is out on the way, we have the recent 2024 or 2023 Republican debate panel that happened on Fox News. You can still catch it. I think you can catch it on Rumble for free. And let's just say it's pretty interesting. Trump is not there. He did have an interview with Tucker Carlson, mano y mano. You can check on X or Twitter. So if you want to learn more about the Republican nominees, I recommend both of those things, of course. So with that said, let's dive into the discussion. To start off, Beth, can you introduce yourself, what your business is about, and all that good stuff?
Sure. It's nice to be here, Riddell. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Beth McDaniel. I'm president of a company called Reactive Surfaces. And Reactive Surfaces operates in the paint and coatings industry. And what we do is we innovate in that space. And what we do is we innovate new coating systems to do something. So people might think, well, paint, really? Well, yeah, it's a problem because people, well, it's not a problem. I mean, it's just the biggest industry that no one ever really thinks about. But when you think about coatings, a coating is a paint without color. Okay, so we use those terms kind of synonymously. You'll hear me saying that, using both of those terms. But a paint just has color, and paints historically have been used for two purposes: to protect an underlying surface or to decorate it with your canary yellow or something like that. And what we've done is we've added a third dimension to coating systems, which is functional coatings. And we want a world where you walk into a room and your room responds to you. Your environment responds to your presence in a particularly good way. And that's what paints and coatings can do if they're put on surfaces and they have these functionalities. We have the difference from what we do, reactive surfaces, versus a lot of other paint companies, because there are other smart coatings, and your audience might be saying, yeah, but I've heard about like antimicrobial coatings. And that's true. There are. We have an antimicrobial technology as well. And that technology is based on, but our technologies are based on using biomolecules, naturally occurring and naturally non-toxic. And so that's a big difference. We get just as much functionality when we reach into nature and look for functionality there. So nature has been doing it for a lot longer, and Mother Nature's pretty good at it. And so when we see some sort of functionality like an enzyme that breaks down natural oils and fats in nature, the art of what we do is to harness that functionality, that enzyme, stabilize it into a coating system, and ask it to do what it does in nature, but in a coating system. And in that way, then when we spread that on a surface and the paint dries and it still has that quality of antimicrobial or self-cleaning, or in the case that I'll talk to you about in a little bit, carbon capture coatings, which capture CO2, then they have, then surface area becomes your canvas for functionality. And so that's our business in a nutshell. And I'm president. I'm a lawyer. And I do some other stuff, some human rights work and, stuff like that. But what we're doing now is we're focusing on some really big problems and trying to use the tools that we have to help solve some big problems.
Okay, all right. So I believe this is your husband, correct?
That is, yes, that is my husband. Steve, we
You're
can't hear you.
muted.
You're muted.
That's a good thing, because I said I don't know this woman. But anyway, I'm joking with you. Yes, of course, we are married, and she is my better half.
All right, excellent,
And this is
excellent.
the brainchild of all of our technologies. This is the crazy scientist behind all of that reactive surfaces technology.
But you know what? You want to hear something funny, actually, Riddell? I mean, Beth acts like she will say to you that she's not a geek, but that she speaks geek, because I'm a geek and her father was a geek. And so somehow or another, we got together, and she can tolerate geeks. That's all I can tell you.
Fair enough, fair enough. So I think it's important for people to kind of know is like, why did you guys decide to start this business, and what is its relation to climate change?
Well, Steve, you should probably tell the story because you started the business right before I got onto the scene about 23 years ago. And maybe you should tell them how we got involved in the business.
Well, sure. I mean, Beth and I are both lawyers, and in fact, that's how we met. But before I was a lawyer, I had a life as a scientist, and 9/11 happened. At that point, there were all sorts of people trying to figure out what we were going to do about terrorism. How could we have an effective counterterrorism? One of the things they were most concerned about was chemical weapons, the use by terrorists of chemical weapons, because they had in fact been used before in Japan. The Shinrikyo cult had used them on Tokyo subways. And so everybody was concerned about it. It turns out that my PhD was on enzymes that broke down chemical weapons. And so I was approached by a number of different news sources that wanted to talk to me about, what could we do using my technology to prevent a chemical weapons attack. And basically I said, well, first of all, you need to understand that you'll hear them called nerve gases. They hardly are nerve gases. They're little bitty tiny oily droplets. And the way they work is they land on surfaces, and then you touch that surface and you're killed by that. It's meant to actually contaminate weapons so that you cannot get back up on your tank or pick up your gun or use your radio communicator. That's what it's meant to do. I said, so the only way that it would be valuable to use this enzyme is if you could use it before that happened, prophylactically. If you could take an enzyme and put it on the surfaces that you want to protect, and it could just sit there until such time as it had the ability to then decontaminate that chemical weapon, then it might work. Well, anyway, the long and short of it, Riddell, is about maybe 3 or 4 months after that, I get a call from a friend of mine, and who I'd known for many years. And he was a money raiser. And he said, McDaniel, I just saw you on TV. He said, and this is what you said. Is that BS or not? And I said, Charlie, mainly it's BS, because I have no idea whether it will work or not. He said, if I got the money together, would you give it a try? And to this day, I can't tell you why I said yes, but I did. And that's how it started.
And as a result of that, we have a paint that was developed by our company, Reactive Surfaces, that if it were painted prophylactically, like on the barracks of Army barracks, or on a tank, or on a computer, or something like that, and there were a nerve gas attack, then it would detoxify those surfaces in about 24 hours. You'd be able to eat off that surface. And that is absolutely not the case otherwise. There is nothing else that does that we know. Right. Yeah. So that's functional coatings, okay? So you're kind of getting an idea that this is, your coating reacts to the environment in some kind of positive way to solve some sort of problem. And that's where our innovation lies.
Okay. You also mentioned something in relation to, a carbon function to the coating that you're referring to. Can you expand upon that?
Sure. So I'll start, and then Steve can get into it a little bit deeper. But what our latest technology platform is what we call carbon capture coatings. It's a climate change solution, and it's a carbon removal solution. Some of your audience might be familiar with. There are different kinds of solution for climate change. What we need to do is we need to lower emissions. That's important. And find ways of doing that and alternate sources of energy. And then on top of it, though, the UN's panel, the International Panel on Climate Change, has in one of their, I think the 2020 report came out and said, or 2021 came out and said, not only do we need to lower emissions by all that we've been saying all this time, and there are certain milestones and goals that need to be reached in order to not get past a tipping point that we don't want to go past. We're going to need carbon removal. And that means just pulling CO2 out of the air, not just reducing the amount of CO2 you're putting in, but we need to pull out some of this legacy. And what we're adding like 40 billion tons of CO2 per year that comes from man-made, the burning of fossil fuels. And so we need to start pulling some of that down. And so where our solution lies is in that carbon removal space. That's where we lie. It can be used as a carbon mitigation tool as well. But here's what it is. It's a paint. Again, we look to nature. How can we functionalize this coating system so that it will pull down CO2? Well, we all know from 8th grade biology that plants and algae capture CO2, absorb CO2, and then use that along with sunlight and water to, bear their fruit, and they release oxygen in the process too. And so we looked for things in nature, and I'm going to let Steve explain it because it's really an interesting story, how an interesting moment of innovation that he incurred to come up with this idea of developing a coating system that has algae in it. And that's the functionality, is photosynthesis.
Yeah. Beth really kind of told you the story very well.
Sorry, did I tell the ending already?
Not at all. I mean, I think what you want me to tell him about is my research in the Arctic. I've done several different stints in the Arctic on research teams. And in one particular stint, I was in the Canadian Arctic, and we were trudging across this bunch of snow and rocks. And I see off in the distance, Riddell, I see a bright red rock sticking up out of this otherwise fairly flat bunch of rocks. And I think, that's probably the Canadian Geological Service marker. They probably spray painted it. And so I led my team over there. But as we got closer and closer to the rock, I realized it wasn't paint at all. It was a living organism called a lichen, which is you've probably seen them when you've gone hiking or whatever. Usually they look like bright splashes of paint, orange and yellow and green and gray and black, all over rocks and other surfaces. And they look all the world like a paint. And in fact, they act like a paint. You can't get them off of a rock without a rock hammer. So they adhere very tightly to a surface, a vertical surface, just like a paint on your wall. And that what they are two organisms that have learned how to work together. One of them is a fungus that produces the outer body of the organism. And then inside of that are algae, microscopic unicellular algae. The fungus gives the algae a place to live. The algae produce carbon compounds for the fungus, and it's just this commensalistic circle. So yeah, that's right. And so when we were hit with the news in 2018 from the United Nations, which, quite frankly, we should have known. It's not like this is the first.
We should have been freaking out a long time ago.
Right, we should have been. But we heard it in 2018, and Beth says that I got catatonic and laid around on the couch because I mean,
that's so unlike him, believe me.
Well, anyway, I can tell you this, that I thought to myself, golly, I mean, we as parents, we do everything in our power to make sure our children will prosper in the future, that they will be well, and that they will have a verdant green planet to live on. And all of a sudden I realized that there was no guarantee of that. Not at all. Not even for my teenage children. They could very well never see another tolerable summer. They could very well see not another tolerable winter. That's possible. And I told Beth, we got to do something. So what we did, I thought if we could make a paint that worked like a lichen, like we see in nature, it might pull down CO2, and we might be able to sequester it. So Beth and I went to our team, and we gave them. It was a team decision, and we all went to dinner, and we said, "Hey, we have this workaday job, but here's something that we really need to think about. Would you guys be willing to do this?" And to the person, they said, "Yes, let's do it." And so we gave ourselves 3 months. We called it Operation Moonshot, and it took us longer than 3 months. Okay, it took us about a year. But after about a year, we had it. It was a paint that looked very, very similar to a lichen, acted very, very similar to a lichen, and it would entrain living algae, photosynthesize, and pull down CO2. That's how it happened.
So that's very interesting. I can honestly, I never would have imagined that a potential solution to lowering the carbon emissions in the atmosphere would be utilizing paint, of course. So when you're kind of telling this to people, I would say probably people on the left or Democrats probably would be like all for this idea, but obviously we know that people on the right are the skeptics, especially the far right. They're the things that think this is all a hoax. So how do you pitch them and let them know that this is a tool that works, this is a tool that is easy to use, and this is a tool that will help with climate change?
Well, honestly, I think most people really do buy into it now. I mean, there's undisputable scientific proof, and all of the scientists in the world have come together. The best scientists in the world, thousands of scientists, are on the UN International Panel on Climate Change, and they all agree. I mean, it's not legitimately disputed, so I can't say that we spend a lot of time trying to convince people otherwise. We have a solution, you know. I mean, whether you like it or not, it's happening. And, you can say what was man-made or not, but that doesn't really matter because it's still happening. And what we found, like Steve mentioned, we have older teenage kids, and actually I haven't found that there's too many of them, even those that are more conservative, that don't believe in it. It's kind of the older people that don't believe in it, really. I mean, across the board, I think younger people are concerned about what they're being left and with. And it doesn't really, it's the one issue that I know, I'm not sure crosses party lines in younger generation. But I'm not a political analyst either. I'm just saying, but we're just in the business. We're not in the business of convincing other people, but we haven't run across it too much. Most people kind of buy into that, this is where we're at, however we got here, this is where we're at. And we also don't take a strong position on what everyone else should do. I mean, my position on what businesses should do is clean up their mess. Okay. I mean, we offer a solution for pulling down your CO2. If you're going to produce it, just clean up your mess. Okay. I mean, it's a cost of doing business. And so I think there's a way that we can balance things, and not strip ourselves of everything that we want to do. But we need to have some of these innovative solutions that can really help out. And we need to support those kind of solutions so we can get out of this mess that we got in. I mean, we don't want to be known, these people on this call and these people listening in this audience, as the generation that, let humanity kind of go. I just can't have that on my shoulder.
It's a very fair point. So with that said, when you're looking at how the product works, and obviously you listed some pros on like how it will benefit climate change, but for the audience, because there's always like a pros and cons to everything. So if you had to elicit a potential pro, obviously you can repeat what you said or just add upon it if you want, and a potential con of the product being utilized, what would you say those would be?
Well, I would say there is a very active portion of this industry where people capture carbon, but then they utilize it to produce more oil. And there's some arguments that can be, at least for a short period of time, carbon negative. However, when that particular well is depleted, then it becomes strongly carbon positive. And so when you add those things all up, you got to be careful, because you've got to make sure that you are in fact carbon negative. So that's one thing. Having said that, it's a funny business. Nobody in this business, I don't think, we certainly don't, wishes their competitors any ill will. There's, goodness gracious, there's plenty of carbon to go around. Let's use every tool in the toolbox, right? So I would say one of the cons is that it may be that people are going to utilize it to actually just make more carbon. The other thing that is a negative is that there are a lot of untested technologies that people are seeing in the press, and they just think, oh, dust our hands, it's good, we're done. That's hardly the case. And in fact, because it's just easier to say we have it solved, because we're going to pump it down a hole, or we're going to put this over sending on a geyser, it's easier to say, hey, this is a solution that will do everything. But remember, like Beth said, we're talking about 40 billion tons per year that are going into the atmosphere. And that's a lot of carbon to pull down. So we need to use every resource we can. As far as the pros I go, if you look at nature, Rodell, if you look at how nature is the best engine we've ever seen for pulling down carbon and make use of it. It's called the carbon cycle. And carbon comes in, it comes from the atmosphere. Plants take it in, convert it by photosynthesis into wood or into fruit, whatever. That is utilized down on the ground level. And then ultimately, when those organisms or that wood rots, it releases CO2 and it goes back up. So there's this big cycle, it's carbon cycle. It did a great job and still does a great job of pulling down great gobs, hundreds and hundreds of tons per year of CO2.
Billions of tons. Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds of billions of tons per year of CO2. It also releases some, but net and overall, net, it's net negative, and that's what.
No worries. Last thing that you were talking about was about like the plants and their impact and how they bring down 100 billion tons of carbon from the atmosphere and the power of nature.
Yeah, and it was working just fine until the Industrial Revolution or thereabouts, right at the turn of the 19th century, when we started utilizing large amounts of fossil fuels to fuel our industry. Then we started putting in a bunch of CO2 that wasn't counterbalanced by the carbon cycle. It tried, in fact. That's one of the reasons that the ocean right now is so acidic. The CO2 dissolves very well in water. You know that because you like the fizzy taste of carbonic acid in a Coke, and that's carbon dioxide, and it dissolves very well in water. But when it does, as I said, it forms carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is a very good acid if you want to degrade the materials in reefs and other structures that ocean creatures depend upon. So, how does nature do it? If we look at nature, how is it that it's such a good carbon engine, carbon capture and release engine? The way it does it, Rodell, is it takes microalgae, the same ones that we're using, and it spreads them over every single surface on the earth. There is practically no surface on the surface of this planet that doesn't have its variety of microscopic algae just churning away doing photosynthesis everywhere. The ocean has it down to some 200 to 300 meters. It's called the photic zone. And in fact, most of the oxygen you're breathing right now was produced by microalgae just a few weeks ago. Most of it in the ocean. And so that's how it does it. It spreads it over a very, very large surface area. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you need to use photosynthetic algae. You need to spread them over vast amounts of surface area, and you let them do their thing. And rather than, though, going ahead and rotting and taking that CO2 back up into the atmosphere, you have to sequester it. You have to put it somewhere so it doesn't re-emit. That's what the coating allows us to do, both capture and sequester the CO2 so that we can do anything we want to with that captured carbon.
Yeah, paint is our surface in the paint business. Surface area is your business, and so that's what it's all about, and that's what's required. That's part of the formula that's required, and that's what paint can give us. Is it can cover surface area. It doesn't just have to cover it laterally. It can go vertical, and that's a really important part of it. Like a lot of people say, why don't we just plant a lot of trees? And everyone loves trees and all that. We shouldn't be tearing down forests, but there's all sorts of issues that come about just planting trees, but it would take, in order to combat climate change, it would take 1 trillion trees planted is the estimate, which would cover about the size of the domestic United States. Okay, so it's not a real workable solution. It would displace way too many people wherever it took place. But that's because a tree takes lateral space, right? I mean, each tree is going to take some space on its own. And so where we can go vertical with photosynthesis, that's what paint allows us to do, is go vertical. So you see paint, the two qualities about it: it adheres well, and it's lightweight. And you see paint at the top of skyscrapers; it doesn't fall off, So we can go vertical, and that's a very important attribute to this technology.
Yeah, I could definitely see how this technology would be extremely beneficial, and very practical in terms of its usage. So if a person were to use it, to start off, how would they be able to obtain the paint that you guys are referring to? And the second part is, what is its actual practical usage? Is it all purpose for like all different types of surfaces, or does it need to be used in a very specific way?
Well, it's a great question. And so there's all sorts of paints that we can make for all sorts of surfaces. What we have done is we have created a paint that is the highest and best use for helping solve the problem of climate change. Okay. And that paint would be in a modular situation. So we would have like a module, plus that makes it easier to build and easy to place in different places. But imagine a 1 meter cube module, just a plastic cube that could be stacked upon each other. And within that, we can paint a whole bunch of surface area with this carbon dioxide capturing paint. And so maybe within 1 meter cube, we might have 20 to 40 meters squared worth of surface area within that. And just like we were just talking about, surface area is a big key to this. So let's get as much surface area doing the work of photosynthesis with the paint that we can. And so that was the paint that we first developed because of the urgency and the timing of this problem. There are other paints to come that will serve different functions, like more, around the house and stuff like that. But what we expect, because we've developed a modular system, is there's no reason why someone couldn't stack these things up in their backyard. So this will be the first and only that we know of individual sequestration machine.
All right. And how would they be able to obtain it?
It's not available yet. We're right now we're seeking funding to get into our to finish our pilot plant in Northern California, and so it's taking we're taking those commercial steps. It might be interesting. It will be available. Just keep your ears open, and you might hear about us also, hopefully. In relationship to the X Prize. Are you familiar with the Carbon Removal X Prize?
I'm not personally.
Mm-hmm. Well, X Prizes, there's a lot of X Prizes. And X Prizes are generally like contests where they're used to drive innovation in a specific area to solve an existential type problem, a food scarcity or water, clean water for everyone or something. So there's a new X Prize called Carbon Removal. It's sponsored by Elon Musk. It was actually from 2020 is when the prize was initiated, when the contest was initiated. The prize won't be awarded until 2025, and a lot has to be done in order to win that. But our team is called Team Lycan. We're a qualified competitor in the X Prize. It's the biggest prize purse ever, $100 million for the best carbon removal technology, and we're going for the prize.
All right, sounds good. Do you have a website that people can look this stuff up on if they wanted to?
Sure. Yeah, if you go to our company website, reactivesurfaces.com, and that's surface, like the surface of a table, not services, and reactivesurfaces.com. And if you just go to our technology pages, you'll see carbon capture coatings. And then we're on LinkedIn. We just had an article in NASDAQ this week, actually, in NASDAQ online. So you can look up that, and in USA Today recently.
All right, excellent. So when it comes down to the usage of this paint and it's the amount of absorption it would have in absorbing the CO2 emissions, what would be like the ratio of surface area paint? You might have said it, but I just want to be clear: surface area paint versus the amount of CO2 it would be capturing.
Well, we measure these things. Beth, you want me to answer that?
Sure.
Okay, so we measure these things, Radel, and in our labs and in general in the industry is the amount of carbon dioxide measured in millimoles, and I'll tell you what that means in a minute. The millimoles of carbon dioxide that are pulled out of the air for every meter squared per hour. So it's millimoles per hour per meter squared. A millimole is the gram molecular weight of something. So carbon has carbon dioxide rather, it has a molecular weight of 44. So a millimole of carbon dioxide is 44 milligrams. So 44 milligrams per hour per meter squared. And that's how we determine it. We know how much a given surface is pulling down because we can measure it. We put CO2 monitors up next to it, put it in a box, and watch the curves. And we can see it go from ambient, which is over 400 parts per million, down to almost nothing over a course of time. And we know how many meters squared are in that device. And so we can come up with a millimoles of carbon dioxide per hour per meter squared. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I got the general idea from the equation. To take the question a step further, so people can get a visual image on how it would work. So, in terms of using the product, and obviously once it's up and running, and people are using the paint on their whatever surfaces they're using it on. And the beneficial thing about society now is people are definitely taking more of a conservative effort to lower their carbon footprint on society as a whole. So it's not nearly as bad as you could say as like the industrial area, but also not all places are like America, China or in India. They don't care nearly as much as people in the United States of America. So when you're seeing people utilize the product, what is your like expectation of like the amount of paint that would need to be used, or the amount of people who would be using the paint, and for it to actually make a dent or make a realistic impact on the carbon emissions in the atmosphere?
Well, go ahead, Beth.
No, you can take it or I can take it. I mean, it's a great question. Maybe to give your listeners an idea of something, like when we're talking about a module that contains some CO2 painted surfaces, some carbon capture coating surfaces. If you had one of our modules and we were measuring it during the time of this conversation, the CO2 level in that module would have dropped probably depends on where you are. It can vary a little bit, but it's going to be around 420 parts per million. And by this time, we've been on this call for 45 minutes or so, it would be down to about 50. Okay, so you can see it working. It works in a reasonable amount of time that you can measure, and you can see, and we know exactly how much has been captured. It would take some number of modules to capture, a ton of CO2. There might be, it depends on how the module is designed, and we're the paint people. So I imagine the module will get much better than even we can do it. At our rates right now, it's like 100 modules per ton of CO2 over a year.
And we had to, for the X Prize to be one of the competitors, we had to do a very extensive third-party study to determine what it would take to pull down 1 million tons per year, and we did. And you can read all about that if you want to in our recent scientific paper in the Journal of CO2 Utilization.
The
It's
March
on
2023 issue.
right, and so the link is on our website. And if you want to read in detail what it would take to pull down 1 million tons per year, that will tell you. That's a third party evaluation. But that brings up a good point. We're not talking about millions of tons. We're not talking about hundreds of tons. We're talking about billions of tons. And so we have to do whatever we do, whatever approach we take to this, it has to be something that can be scaled to billions of tons of recapture and sequestrations per year. And in my opinion, I shouldn't say it that way. There are different ways to do it. But one of the best ways to do it is to utilize these resources of the planet itself. And so the planet has lots and lots of surface area. 72% of the surface area of the planet is ocean. And if you can use that as your surface, then you have a chance. You can get to the billion-ton level.
All right. Yeah, the solution definitely seems so extremely straightforward, and I can't really see anybody, even if you're like a far right, you think climate change is a hoax type individual, can't really see the reason why you would kind of frown at this product, especially considering not only it does it have, environmental benefits, to considering it could help lower the carbon emission rate, but also has practical usage because at the end of the day it's paint as well. So people use paint for a lot of different things, of course. I I'm curious when it comes to when you probably think of people using paint, obviously you think of them using it in typically more suburban-ish areas to paint whatever they got to paint. But a lot of these circumstances of like higher carbon emission in the atmosphere are probably going to be cities. Very populated cities, especially ones that have manufacturing companies of whatever substance that they're manufacturing at that time. Is there an Have you thought about a pitch to make these things more? Basically, how I'm putting this is pitching it to cities to make it to utilize it more often for like the city buildings and government buildings, stuff like that, so that way in the cities it has the maximum usage of considering the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. If that makes sense.
I love the way you're thinking because there's nothing I love more than holding people accountable. And I think the city should be accountable for, lowering their emissions and taking steps and to set a good example. We have found that what a lot of cities do right now, and frankly, big companies also, and this is who we're relying on to really kind of take on these responsibilities, is they buy carbon offsets to offset their emissions, and that's kind of a problem. Is carbon offsets aren't always as good as you think they might be. And so I don't know how familiar you are with that, but there's a whole commodities exchange market that exchanges carbon offsets. So if you pull down, a ton of CO2, if our carbon dioxide removal technology can pull down a CO2, we can go sell that on an open market, and someone who has to emit CO2 can buy that to neutralize the impact that they have. And to conform to regulations and all of that. But a lot of these carbon offsets aren't that good, okay? Meaning they don't really work, or they've been double counted or something like that. So that's what we're finding that cities are doing a lot, and companies. Unfortunately, I think they think maybe they're doing something, but they're really not. And so we need to get real, really.
Right, fair enough.
But
Go
can
ahead.
I add something? Can I add something, Riddell?
Yep.
I'm with Beth. Your thinking is dead on, because there are certainly cities. I won't name them necessarily, but certainly cities, especially in Asia, where the air is simply not breathable. And people are actually pumping oxygen into their houses or wearing masks because they're not getting enough oxygen. If you have someone who's asthmatic, and they're, especially if they live in a house, you've got to be very careful. You can't have more than two people in a average sized room with someone who's gasping for oxygen, or because you're breathing too much CO2. The point is this: there are cities, if they were to follow the approach that you're suggesting, could do a monumental job of improving the air quality for their citizens, and it wouldn't take much. I've estimated, for instance, the city of Shanghai could have 6 relatively not that large farms in and around its environ, and could be pumping out as much oxygen as this population needs.
You mean carbon capture farms?
I'm sorry, carbon capture farms.
Yeah.
So it's a good thought. You're dead on.
Sometimes we refer to our facilities with these carbon capture as farms because we're actually farming out, the paint, the algae in the paint, and we have a harvesting process and all of that. Yeah, we would even employ local farmers to take care of these farms of painted algae.
Mm-hmm.
Just so I understand correctly. So obviously, based on how your product works, it works similarly to the lichen that you're referring to. So are we saying that the paint has living algae on it?
Yes, it's not on it though. It's entrained just like in a lichen. It's in the interior of the coating. When you touch the surface of the coating, you're not really touching much algae. It's down embedded in the coating itself. These algae are not toxic, and the coating itself is honestly edible. But I'm not saying it tastes anything.
It is.
Okay, but it's actually edible. In fact,
he'll taste stuff like that in meetings. I promise you, it's so funny.
Well. So, the point is that it is not toxic. You can touch it. It can be in the same room that you are in your house, in your grocery store, in your civil building, whatever. All it will do is pull a bunch of CO2 out and pump a bunch of oxygen out. And so, yeah, that's right. You could.
It's not the kind of algae that would cause like an algal bloom or anything toxic. There's, how many varieties of algae are there? There's all sorts of algae.
Yeah, just go down to your health food store and you can buy them by the bottle. Okay, spirulina, chlorella. I mean, you can just buy them and take them home and mix them in your smoothie.
All right, excellent. So I guess my final question is, because for the most part, everything is pretty straightforward and it sounds like a great idea to me. For the people who are out there that are obviously more black-pilled, who really have no hope for humanity moving forward, especially when it comes to climate change and the fear of the carbon emissions in the atmosphere, people realize that the current status as of right now is not endangering humanity necessarily, but the fears behind it is the rate of growth as of right now. And if the rate of growth keeps on going faster and faster, eventually it will hit that threshold when it will be a danger to humanity as a whole. So with that said, people have a fear of global warming, for example, and that's a term that people bring up, or someone could bring up a different term based off a environmental disaster, so to speak, or a natural disaster, so to speak. So when these people see these things and their fear of the rate of growth and they have no hope, when it comes down to utilizing the paint, how do you convince these people to say that this is actually going to have an impact versus them thinking that even if we use it, we're doomed anyway, so who cares?
Well, I'll add to that. If there was a recent study done in Norway where they looked at the rationale and the reason of, I think, 12,000 participants, and what was it that caused them to have concerns about what were their concerns? Some of it was anger. Some of it was just plain old anger. They're mad at the people who they perceive have put us in this position. Some of it was fear. The very same thing that you're talking about, fear. They fear what will happen in the future. And then there were other reasons, but those are the two main ones. Here's what I would say to those who fear, especially young people. Okay, there is something you can do, and you can do more than you think. If you imagine that the planet as you want it to be, if you imagine a verdant green earth, like your grandparents and great grandparents or whatever lived in, keep that in your front window shield. Keep that thought in your thought process at all time. It's nothing magic. It's just the power of positive thinking. And that way, when you talk to your neighbor, or you talk to your congressman, or you do any kind of talking that you do, you have that image in your head. And that is your personal goal, and you can imbue others with that goal. And so it works. So just have that in your head. What we're trying to do is to try to conceive of and help bring about a world that we can thrive in, not merely survive in. And that's what we're trying to do. And so I would say to those people who are, and I know people like that. I even know scientists like that. And when I tell them, well, what if there was something we could do? They're happy to hear it. They may not necessarily buy it, okay, but they are happy to hear it. What do you think?
Yeah,
Beth?
and I would add to that. I mean, if you, whether you believe it or not, it's a good thing just in case, And so there are some solutions out there, but they're going to need support. They're going to need governmental support. They're going to need corporate support, and even private sector support. And so think about those things. Look for technologies. We're not the only one, but look for things like this and support it. When I used to teach advocacy in high schools and how to go and talk to your lawmaker and tell them what you want. Well, if you believe in like cleaning up this mess with carbon removal technologies, tell them you want carbon removal technologies, because it's like you say, it's just a hot topic right now, and they definitely need to be supported, because without them, we're not going to get there. But with them, we can.
All right, sounds good. Like I said before, this is definitely a very useful solution, and the practical nature of it is something that you should always consider, because obviously people adhere to whatever is easiest for them to use normally and typically. And a lot of the things that I hear from certain climate change scientists are just not reasonable and practical based on current society. When the people say, hey man, use your phone less, use your car less, stuff like that, people are not going to listen to you. People are not going to do this. In this situation, you just got to use paint. Like, if there's no extra step, you're just using something that you would use anyway to paint whatever you're about to paint. But a more one that actually has other benefits and positives versus another version of paint at the end of the day. And these are the type of solutions that I think are better suited for this modern day. But instead of going backwards, because we know we won't, technology will continue to progress, and technology will continue to advance. So we're never going to go back in the old age when we're turning off our AC, heater, never using a car, and never using our phone. All of that stuff is not happening ever. So,
and even if it did, frankly, unfortunately, it wouldn't get us there. So we need to take more surgical steps to getting there, and that would involve like really good carbon removal.
Exactly. So hopefully you guys got a lot from the information that was said today. Make sure you guys check out their links and be advocating for them with the X project, so they can continue with the project that they got going on. All their information's on my website per usual, www.purplepoliticalbreakdown.com. Hope you guys enjoyed. Rate it 5 stars. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.
Well, check it out, y'all. We got what you need. We're all living in apartments, condos, vans. Well, dude, even you can have a studio in a box. Yes, we can help you with that right here at Blind Knowledge. We work on your budget, and we figure out your measurements. We'll get you the best sound for the best price. Let me know, 877-237-1143 or at blindknowledge.com. Yep.